Hi, hello everyone. It is absolutely wonderful to be here with all of you at South by Southwest. It's great to be in this crowd. It's always great to be in this crowd. The room's full. It looks amazing. I've got a lot to go through today. I want to take you through 10 technologies that our team of reporters thinks are going to change the way we live and work over the next several years. And I also want to talk to you a little bit about what all of these technologies might mean for the way we live and work. So I expect many of you, if not most of you, are familiar with MIT Technology Review. So we are a media company owned by MIT. We publish journalism for current and future tech leaders like yourselves. If you don't know us already, the name may make you think academic journal. We are not an academic journal. Rather, we're journalists that we tell the stories about how technologies are being created and used and how those technologies will impact all of our lives. We are inspired by our relationship to MIT, the world's leading university for engineering, physical sciences, computer science, mathematics, and a bunch of other subject areas besides. MIT alumni and faculty include 101 Nobel laureates at last count, but every year that number increases, 26 Turing Award winners, and more astronauts than any university other than the Naval Academy. MIT's influence, I don't have my slides are not up, but MIT's influence in the business community may be even more noteworthy. As of 2015, so in 2015, people at MIT did a study and they took a look at the companies that had been founded by alumni. What they found is that of the people who had graduated from MIT, that more than 30,000 companies had been started by alumni. Those 30,000 companies generated collective revenue, if you add all 30,000 together, collective revenue of $2 trillion. At that point in time, when they did this in 2015, so about 9 years ago, that $2 trillion meant it was higher than the GDP of the 10th largest economy in the world. At that point, it was right in between India and Russia. So we're talking about a lot of economic might that comes through the Institute. So MIT's known for all of this, of course, so you probably knew much of that already. And it's also known for a hacker culture, a kind of playfulness, a creativity, which really comes through in unique ways in approaching problems and solving problems. And putting this together with that interdisciplinarily and trying to figure out, could we hack something together here that will be a cool solution to a problem? So out of this incredible institution comes this journalistic enterprise, MIT Technology Review. You can think of us like Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review comes out of Harvard Business School, very similar to the way we're organized, or like the Smithsonian Magazine, which is a part of the Smithsonian, or sort of comes out of the Smithsonian. It also happens that this year, 2024, is the 125th year of MIT Tech Review. And so you can see sort of the very first copy. It's kind of an old copy from our archives. We have the archives. And in its very first days, the purpose, when it was set up, the purpose was always to explain to the broader public what they called the always new and ever more complex problems that we face as a society. To share the stories of what humans can accomplish with the right amount of know-how, creativity, and commitment. That very first issue, again, as I said, we have all the issues in our archives. There's the very first article is about the function of a laboratory. You can imagine the kinds of innovations and the kinds of advancements we've seen over the 125 years we've been doing what we do. But we've moved on, as you would hope and expect, and today we are a multi-platform media company. We publish in digital every day. We have a very nice app that we've just relaunched quite recently. We have a whole bunch of newsletters that are specific on particular topics that we send out all the time to hundreds of thousands of people to get into their emails. We have a print magazine, we have podcasts, and we have a really nice events series. We are aimed at anyone who is interested in the future of our world and how technology is shaping it, but who probably aren't experts themselves. Probably, you don't have to be an MIT alum. I'm not an MIT alum. You don't have to be an engineer or a scientist. An awful lot of people who read us are not engineers and scientists and never have ever thought about MIT as a place that they would even set foot. Rather, what kind of brings everyone together is the primary focus is, across all the platforms, is on kind of answering the question, what is technology doing for people? And this zeitgeist moment that we're in here, when all we've been talking about really in the business press for the last year or so has been artificial intelligence. We've also got technological development in robotics, in biogenetics, in engineering the human body, quantum computing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are providing rigor and insight to a very large number of people who are using these technologies, who are making them or creating them, or who would like to take the right decisions about how to implement or regulate those technologies in their own lives and world. So all of us here, I expect, believe and think that the work we do matters. I hope we're all doing work that we believe matters. I hope you'll tolerate a slight indulgence. I want to talk for a moment, and then I'm going to get into the meat of the matter. I do want to talk for just a moment about this time in media and journalism, 2024. Now, I am aware that most of you are not paying much attention to the headlines around the collapse of the journalism and the media industry. We're talking about really kind of daily stories about, are we heading for an extinction level event for journalism? I don't know if you know that National Geographic, which I read as a 7 or 8 year old, or I didn't read it, but I looked at the photos as a 7 or 8 year old. When it came, first time I saw photographs of the moon, first time I saw so many different parts of the planet photographs. That magazine is undergoing a slow shutdown. It more or less doesn't exist. They laid off all of their staff 6 months ago. Popular Science announced in November, that it's also not going to publish anymore. They've been around for 151 years, no longer going to be publishing. If you add to this, Wired, they laid off 20% of their editorial team a couple of months ago, and that included every one of their science reporters. There's nobody any longer who's publishing at Wired about science. CNN did the same thing about a year ago, and their tech reporters. So why is this happening? I'm not going to bore you with it, but it goes back to the emergence of the internet. Everything went online. Everything was free because, remember, we were paying with our eyeballs. That worked okay for a little while, but then digital advertising got swallowed up by large platform companies like Facebook and like Instagram and Google Ads and so forth. So there's simply not enough digital advertising dollars to fund all the journalism that we have all become accustomed to. So people in my job have to ask people like you to pay for content. So that's why you're running into paywalls all over the internet. But because without people willing to pay for content, we, as the expression goes, if you don't have people willing to pay for content, well, we can't have nice things. This is leading to closures of independent media companies. We are in a very unique position because of our relationship to MIT, but we don't get everything from them. We do need to continue to engage with our audience and convince our readers to pay for content. It's incredibly difficult to make a solid business out of reporting and telling stories about what's happening in the tech world, in the science world. And it's really hurt the amount of information that most of us, that's really hurt our industry, because the amount of information that we have out there is diminishing. So it's perhaps no surprise that Pew Research Center, this came out sort of in the fall, about 4 or 5 months ago. This study says that today, fewer Americans than ever believe that science has had a mostly positive impact on society. I mean, it's really, I'm going to say it again because it's shocking. Fewer today, as we stand here with COVID shots in our bodies and assembled together. Again, we flew here on airplanes, we've got devices in our pockets, etc. Fewer Americans than ever believe that science has had a mostly positive impact on society. To me, this is, a giant flashing red light, sort of the reddest of red flags. It is critically important, obviously, that we have an informed, educated society if we're going to grapple with the major challenges that are facing us. And of course, I'm talking about things like climate change. I'm talking about artificial intelligence. I'm talking about making the right decisions about how these systems are going to work and control the world that we live in. Because we do have big problems. We do have to face these problems as a collective, as a society, and think about what the truth is. So I know you didn't come here for this. I still, even so, feel I need to invite you to support smart, objective, and trusted journalism. This is a QR code. You might want us to be the publisher that you support. I would love that. But if it's not us, I don't care. Support someone. Support journalism in your local newspaper, whoever. I would love it if you subscribe to MIT Technology Review. We have a nice offer. You'll get a little tote bag. That's all great. But again, if it's not us, let it be someone. Thank you. I forget who it was who said, don't clap, vote. I'm going to say, don't clap, subscribe. So it's time for our list now, and that's what you came for. And I have 10 items to go through. So because it's the 10 breakthrough technologies. I'm not going to spend the same amount of time on each of them, but if you want to dig in and get more, definitely go to our site, dig in. There's quite a lot here. It's listed under the 10 breakthrough technologies, so you can go really deep dive down into these stories. So what is this list? Well, since 2001, we have been creating a list of the 10 new technologies or innovations that we believe will be game changers and that have staying power. All of these technologies are at today a critical breakthrough moment, and either that moment has just occurred or it's coming very, very soon. This process of selecting the 10, which we do every year, comes out in the very beginning, sort of the first couple of months of the new years. But we start in the summer, so about 6 to 8 months ahead of time. The tech reporters and the editors get together and they start throwing ideas around and they start brainstorming. These ideas come from the conversations that they've had during their reporting, when reading through and reviewing research, and otherwise exploring their particular coverage areas, because all of our reporters have sort of really sub-focus areas. That team considers dozens of different ideas across every area of technology that we cover. They debate, they take a straw vote, they come up with a preliminary list, and then they let it sit, kind of ferment for a couple of weeks until our editor-in-chief goes back with some of the luxury of a little bit more time to make a final decision. Now, not every one of these breakthroughs is a positive development. We're not making a judgment about the positivity or the negativity of a development. What we're doing is we are talking about the fact that they are at an important moment in development and are about to get very, very big and very significant. So last year, for example, I was here, I shared the list, and one of the items on the list was the fact it was about drones used in warfare. And the reason we put that on the list was that prices for small but powerful drones had fallen to such a point that it was clear we were going to start seeing them used in warfare. Because you could get a decent drone that could have weapons on it for under $500. So it was clear that that was going to start to become a big technology for war, and in fact, we had already started to see it in Ukraine, Russia. So again, we're not endorsing necessarily these technologies. We're simply wanting to point out that it's powerful and at an important moment in development and really important to pay attention to. So here are some covers of the magazine. As I say, we've been doing this since 2001. Obviously, most of what we do is in digital form, but we do put together a print magazine that has the list as sort of a key component of it once a year. And I thought I'd just flag up. I kind of went back sort of 5 years ago and earlier and pulled a few covers. And I thought I'd just share some of the technologies that got highlighted over these years. I don't have time to go through all of them. But in 2001, we had brain-machine interfaces on the list, which is something that is coming up more with Neuralink, for example. But quite interestingly, that was the first time, 2001, when we put natural language processing on the list of breakthrough technologies. And of course, natural language processing is what drives large language models that underpin or that are used in ChatGPT. So that was 20-something years before we came to ChatGPT. 2007 was mobile AR, or augmented reality. 2009, smart assistants. At that point, Siri was, everybody's phones just woke up, but at that point, Siri was, was sort of rolling out. So again, was getting bigger. 2012 was crowdfunding. So crowdfunding had been out for a while, but it was at 2012 when some platforms were launched that would enable crowdfunding at scale. So at that point, we said it's a breakthrough. 2013, smartwatches. It's hard to believe that 2013 was, we weren't all wearing smartwatches before then, but it really wasn't until after that we all started to get, everyone started to have a smartwatch. Deep learning in 2013, additive manufacturing at scale. 2014 was a particularly exciting year because that was the first year that we put CRISPR on the list. And we called that the biggest biotech discovery of the century. And we had a lot of really wonderful exclusives that we published on CRISPR, both in that time period and in the decade since. 2016 was reusable rockets. We started talking about rockets being able to take off and then bring them back without sort of having to, being able to reuse rockets and not lowering the cost of rocket launches. 2018, generative adversarial networks, GANs. Again, we've been looking at these elements of AI for a long time. And of course, AI was developed at MIT. So it's probably unsurprising that we've been on top of it for as long as we have. And then 2019, Bill Gates came to us and said he wanted to pick the list. So we said, okay, that's a nice invitation. So he came to us and said he wanted to pick the list. We decided that seemed like a fine idea. And he chose two of the things that I'll mention was carbon dioxide capture technologies and also meatless burgers. So it brings us to today. This is sort of this is the aesthetic that we've got on our site around the list in 2024. And I want to just be clear that I am here as the voice of many, many people who are far more expert in these technologies than I am. And that's my colleagues at MIT Technology Review who spend their days uncovering brilliant, sometimes weird, sometimes disturbing or challenging stories about technology. So I'm very much here as a person representing all the very, very deep, detailed knowledge. So I'm going to take you through sort of a more, we'll call it maybe a little more accessible approach to some of these technologies. There's a lot more as you dig into the reporting and the content that we publish. I'm just about to get into the first item, and I want to say that to the crew here, my timer is not counting down. So someone should tell me how much time I've got. I suspect saying that someone will maybe come out with a counter or something. Okay, item 1 is AI for everything. So it's no surprise to see AI on the list. and I note that our very first list, as I said, released in 2001, included natural language processing, the technology that underpins large language models that drive generative AI tools like ChatGPT. And last year, when I was here, we talked about this. Generative AI, of course, was also on the list. But 2023 was a wild year for AI. A lot happened. This first item is our attempt to sum it all up. We're now in a time when the public is interacting with AI directly and consciously playing around with it. I'm sure almost all of you have used ChatGPT. You've written some code, or I used it to draft a condolence note because I wasn't quite sure how to phrase it, so I got really specific about the situation. People are using generative AI to make images. There's obviously loads of advances coming out all the time. Many generative AI tools are now out that are incorporated in search and chatbots, email services, and so on and so on and so on. So there is a lot to say about AI, and of course there are sessions all week. I'm sure. I've gotten invited to several myself, entirely focused on generative AI. So trying to kind of figure out what to say here that would be perhaps different, I decided to ask some questions, raise some questions, and share some predictions and some of our thoughts. So the first thing is about bias. So we know that there is a bias problem in these tools, and that's because the models are trained on data that comes from the web, that's images and texts that include gender stereotypes, for example, or racial discrimination. And because they're trained on sort of the real world, they can encode those biases and reinforce them when used. So how will the bias problem be resolved, and whom will it hurt before it gets resolved? That's the question. We predict that there will continue to be workarounds developed as awareness continues to rise around the problem of bias. And I think people are pretty aware that that is a problem. But it's not going to be solved quickly or easily. So the bias problem, again, we expect there will be workarounds and there will be some improvements, but it's going to take a lot more than the progress that we've made. There's going to be a lot more work before we're talking about solving that. So topic number 2 is copyright law. As these models are being trained on data and content and creative work, expect to see a lot more lawsuits. We've got celebrities like Sarah Silverman or the writer George R.R. Martin. We've got in the journalism industry, the New York Times has sued OpenAI for its use of the content published by the New York Times to train the model. You can also expect to see some technology kind of solutions. Like there's a technology solution called Nightshade that alters images in a way that mucks up the algorithm. So there's a way to alter the images before they're published, so that when that image is sort of absorbed into the model, it messes up the algorithm. So a little bit of prevention of that content, of that copyrighted content getting used. But it's going to continue to be a game of whack-a-mole. And I'm personally watching very closely what happens with the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. In our sector, there's various industry groups that are working through policy protections and legal cases. But again, it's going to continue to be a game of whack-a-mole. Big question as well, number 3, is about jobs. Will they be lost? How many jobs are going to be lost? Or will they just be different? Generally speaking, what we hear today is that researchers largely think that jobs will change in their scope, but not necessarily in their numbers. So people will need to go through some retraining, and rather than expecting to be out of work. So the way that some of the research that has been done is it makes researchers on particular topics much more efficient, but it doesn't take away the need for the human researchers. And there's obviously going to be a lot more work done to kind of figure that out, since there's so much concern, and there would need to be some action to retrain people, if necessary. So topic number 4 is about misinformation. So misinformation is going to remain a very, very big problem. It's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And think about the elections that are coming up. Obviously, the election in the United States for president, but there's elections taking place, awful lot of elections taking place all around the world in 2024. If you take a look at these images, I don't know how many of you remember the dope pope. That's my favorite. Then there was Donald Trump under arrest. Then there was the explosion at the Pentagon. Now, all of those are fake. Those are all fake images. They were shared and viewed by millions of people. Policing these sorts of images, like if you think about the sexually explicit Taylor Swift fake video that went viral a few weeks ago, policing those sorts of fakes is incredibly difficult. So there was an executive order signed on artificial intelligence in October that focused on the importance of labeling AI-created content, but it did not legally require it. The EU has an AI Act. It goes a little further for requiring that. But ultimately, it's extremely difficult to ban deepfakes because so many of them come from open source systems or systems that are built by state actors and so are out of the reach of control and can be impossible to trace. So it's going to be a very messy 2024 in terms of misinformation around the elections, I think especially, and it's really important as consumers of media that we're taking into consideration what we're getting and the fact that an awful lot of what we see may not be real. Another topic, sort of another subject number 5 when it comes to generative AI is it is extremely costly, and there isn't a broad understanding of how costly generative AI is, by which I mean environmental costs. It requires an awful lot of energy. The data centers require an awful lot of energy. And it's also costly on humans. And the reason for that is specifically the low-paid workers, often in poor economies, who are doing data labeling. And this is a really kind of an unseen part of the AI economy. They may be labeling thousands upon thousands of images of sexually explicit content, violent content, abuse of children. I mean, I'm talking people who are spending every day going through hundreds and thousands of photographs in order to label them. We want them to be labeled, but without a lot of understanding of the kind of the wear and tear it can have on human beings' psyche to confront that kind of imagery on an hour in and hour out basis. Tech companies have already come under pressure. There's been some journalism that has exposed the use of low-paid workers by OpenAI, for example. But there's an awful lot going on that is not well understood. There is going to continue to be pressure on tech companies to address these costs, both the human costs and the environmental costs, as awareness rises. But we don't ultimately expect there to be major improvements. And then the final thing is, when it comes to this topic, people are fond of asking, well, what about the existential, societal human risk of AI? What's it going to mean for the continuation of human beings? And our team's view is that and there's a battle, or there'll be arguments between high-profile AI leader over here and high-profile AI leader over there, and they'll yell at each other across the stage, maybe at a place like this, or they'll shout at each other over Twitter, and it becomes a little bit of a kind of a muscle flexing of these sort of tech bros, which our view is ultimately distracting, because these sorts of existential questions are not imminent, not even close. But the other things that I just talked about, the human costs, the environmental costs, the bias, the misinformation, those actually are happening today. And there's a whole lot of look over here distraction that our position is keeping some of these tech leaders from really addressing much more solvable problems. So finally, it's really important to ask, what is even all this AI for? What's the use of generative AI? Ultimately, is there a killer app? Well, we don't really think there is a killer app yet. It's fun to play with it. It's fun to see what it can do when I do a cartoon of a monkey riding a train and with a top hat on. But it's unclear exactly what the needs are for some of these tools. People do like playing with it, but we have also done some research and surveyed tech executives. 1,000 tech executives we surveyed a couple of months ago and asked about how they were using generative AI in their businesses. We wanted to know, we knew that they all said, look, we get it. It's transformative. but we're not so confident when it comes to actually deploying it. Only 9% of those 1,000 people surveyed, which you have to also realize, if they're known to us, they're probably more tech interested than your average tech leader, or excuse me, business executive. So 9% of those 1,000 executives we surveyed had a working use case with generative AI, involving generative AI. Only 9%. And if you look at it by sector, government sector was the lowest, which is unsurprising. 2% had a working use case. 17% for finance, and 28% for IT. And they all said, that got a lot of concerns around the risks. 59% said we're really worried about some of these risks, largely around bias and the concerns about what the bias could introduce into their businesses. And they all felt that they needed to better understand these risks before they went, wholeheartedly into rolling it out into their companies. So there's an awful lot that's going to need to be worked out. But with AI for everything, ultimately, these problems are going to be everyone's problems. So AI for everything, number one. Number two, changing subjects entirely. These are super efficient solar cells. So this is our term for solar panels that add a layer of perovskites. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how it's spelled. These are tiny crystals that absorb different wavelengths of light than more wavelengths of light than traditional silicon cells. So solar cells that are made with perovskites can be quite a bit more efficient at converting energy from the sun into electricity. So there's an image of that, the tiny crystal cell. One of the leading companies in this space is called Oxford PV, and they are shipping panels later this year. We're talking about a 50% increase in efficiency. There's been a lot of other movement too. A lot of major solar manufacturers are adopting or investing in this technology and making acquisitions. We think this is going to be very important in the development of solar energy. You've obviously all heard of this one. This is Apple's new mixed reality headset, Apple Vision Pro. Apple Vision Pro overlays digital content into a real world scene. That might be your living room, it might be your office. We've talked about face computers a long time. Google Glass and Microsoft HoloLens or Meta's Quest. Those are all face computers that fail for a number of different reasons. So what is different now? Well, there's one big difference, and this is Apple. Apple knows a thing or two about consumer tech. I imagine there's nearly as many iPhones in this room as there are people. But more salient is the tech behind it. So the headsets use a twin micro OLED display, which has the highest resolution of any headset ever on the market. I had to put the photograph of Tim Cook, because it's really goofy looking. And he was like, yeah, Vanity Fair cover. And he's got that on his face. Anyway, but mockery aside, our editor-in-chief, who has been around a long time in looking at tech, he's called this the most fully immersive experience he's ever seen. I don't know if you all have tried it. It's too expensive today, it's $3,500. It's not accessible to most people, but the price will drop, and when it does, we expect this to be transformational. Next. I am sure, the buzz in the room, nice. So you've all heard of this one. I saw a story on the Today Show as I was, getting ready to leave my hotel room about this. And the story is this. In the lead up to the Oscars, Novo Nordisk, who is the manufacturer behind two of these drugs, is running an ad urging people not to use them to fit into their Oscar dresses or tuxedos, that it's for health reasons, and it's about treating obesity. It's a very odd premise for the ad. So they came into public consciousness recently These drugs, the two from Novo Nordisk, are kind of the leading drugs, are Ozempic and Wegovy. And they have an active ingredient called semaglutide that works by suppressing appetite through mimicking a hormone that the intestine releases after we eat. And so it causes the patient to feel full. They were originally developed for diabetes treatment and have been shown to help anyone taking them lose an awful lot of weight, so 15, 20% and higher. Today, I'm going back. Today, nearly 2% of the US population has been prescribed one of these drugs. So I did the math, if that's like 6 million people, 6 million people has been prescribed one of these, and that's only 2% of the population. You can imagine, you think about the percentage of our population that suffers from obesity, we could be talking about a 10, maybe 15 times increase in the number of people who are taking these drugs. There are today 70 new treatments in development, and another six are waiting for regulatory approval. There's also action being taken to move from the injection to pills. I mean, we're talking about a major sea change that is going to have make a huge difference for both individual health and public health. And that is especially true when you think about the evidence coming out to show that not only do they enable people to reduce their weight, but they may even protect against heart failure, strokes, and heart attacks. So big change in the public health, a very exciting development for a population like ours that suffers from weight and weight-related sickness. So next is enhanced geothermal systems. So geothermal is the heat energy that's in the earth. It is a really good, stable source of renewable energy, but it's only been practical to extract it from places with certain kinds of geological features and where the heat is relatively close to the surface. So it's not, it hasn't been accessible as a real solution for many parts of the world. But now, using fracking technologies or techniques that have been developed by oil and gas industry, and we all know about fracking, it's been around for at least 10 years or so, geothermal companies can now crack open rocks, inject water at much deeper depths. The steam that comes out, because we're talking about the heat that's down there, the steam drives turbines and produces electricity that can be used and this can be used in lots and lots of places. There is a company called Fervo. We listed it on our 2023 Climate Tech Companies to Watch, which we launched in the fall. We will be publishing every year. This company, Fervo, launched a commercial pilot plant last year in Nevada and have been raising quite a lot of funding. As recently as a week or so ago, I saw that they had another $250 million in funding. That they're using all of this additional money to build another facility in Utah. So there's never, it feels like there's never a problem-free solution. In the case of this particular technology, these fracking techniques may result in seismic activity. You may have heard this. There has been a geothermal fracked facility in Korea, and there's concern, or there appears to be research to suggest that this approach was behind a pretty big earthquake that occurred in South Korea in Paedong, which is a city near Seoul. Okay, chiplets. So you're probably familiar with Moore's Law. Moore's Law says basically every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip doubles, and that's been going on for decades. And engineers have been figuring out ways of making transistors smaller and smaller and smaller, and that explains why we can have a computer in our pockets today when, decades ago that would have been absolutely laughable. But it's getting much harder to do that. The end of Moore's Law, people talk about. So chiplets are smaller, more specialized versions of conventional computer chips. They can be linked together in a number of different ways to build a system that performs similarly. And so they're kind of modular. But they need, so that's great, sounds good, but they need a packaging standard. This is very wonky stuff that I'm telling you, but bear with me. They need a packaging standard to put all these modules together and connect them. And it just so happens that the chip industry has recently made advances towards just that sort of standard, and it is called the Universal Chiplet Interconnect Express, which just rolls off the tongue. And that makes it possible to combine chiplets from a bunch of different manufacturers, which gives these chip makers more freedom to specialize and drive efficiencies and reduce costs and so on and so forth. All of this is expected to greatly boost adoption and support overall faster development and innovation, especially in fields like AI, auto manufacturing, and aerospace. So this is a net positive for tech development. Okay, next I get to talk about CRISPR again. I'm very excited. This is the first ever gene editing treatment. It's built on, it's based on this CRISPR technology. This is a drug that is actually available today, and it was approved in December by the FDA, and also like a month earlier in the UK they approved it. It treats sickle cell disease. So sickle cell disease, you probably know, is caused by inheriting 2 bad copies of the genes that make hemoglobin in our blood. Symptoms of sickle cell disease include bouts of extreme intense pain. Life expectancy for a person with sickle cell is 53 years old. It affects 1 in 4,000 people in the United States. Nearly all of them are African American. There is a new drug that was developed by a company called Vertex that works by editing the DNA of the patient, and it turns on the production of healthy hemoglobin. It turns on the production, it's complicated, it's very cool, but after we're born, there's a gene that stops producing hemoglobin. It kind of just lays dormant. This drug will turn those genes back on if you take it. So it enables these folks to begin producing healthy hemoglobin again. Patients who went through trials were pain-free after treatment. And we published an op-ed, which is, I think there's an image of the page. We published an op-ed by a patient named Jimmy, who was in the clinical trial. He wrote us a story talking about his experience in the trial and the treatment. He was one of the first people to get it. He calls it life-changing. So it's really exciting. I mean, sickle cell is a nasty disease. It is incredibly costly to provide this treatment. It's about $2 to $3 million per treatment. We are obviously hoping that those costs come down. We are obviously hoping that Vertex can perhaps deploy some of these treatments and these drugs in populations in Africa where it is extremely widespread, and there are a lot of young kids who suffer from this. But despite all those, sort of less positives around the cost and kind of the ability for that to scale out, it is an incredibly exciting development, incredibly exciting, because it's only been 11 years since CRISPR was developed, and I showed you that we talked about CRISPR in 2013. It's only been 11 years, and now here we are. It's no longer just in the labs, it's actually in treatments. This will be the first of many treatments that are using, for lots of different health conditions that are using CRISPR. Exascale computers. These are very, very, you can tell from the name, these are very, very powerful computers that are coming online. They perform more than an exaflop's worth of calculations. A what? An exaflop. That's 1 followed by 18 zeros. That is as powerful as 100,000 laptops combined. So I thought about that, and that's like, it's larger than, the stadium full. Imagine a stadium, a football stadium full of fans, about 70,000. It's more than that, right? All of these laptops doing the same thing. The first one was called Frontier. It was built here in the United States. Europe is getting its first one later this year. They're calling it Jupiter. There are 2 more coming in the US. One's called El Capitan, and the other's called Aurora. And I love the names that they're so confident, these names. We believe there may be a few in China, but it's kind of hard to get reliable information about that. The team at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee that is behind the Frontier computer, they're saying that they've got one coming that's 3 to 5 times more powerful than Frontier. So it's just going up and up from there. These machines can perform excellent simulations of the climate, of the universe. I mean, really, really complex calculations, things like turbulence. There is a big challenge. Does anyone know what the challenge is? Can you guess? Yes, it's energy. They are energy hogs. Frontier's power, when idling, so it's just idling, it's the same amount of power that we would use to power thousands of homes. We're talking about, that's when it's idling, it's not even doing calculations. So we're talking about a need not just to build out the speed of these computers, but to think about their environmental sustainability. Heat pumps. I'm waiting for the excitement. No, not as exciting. Yeah, heat pumps are not that exciting. But this is an older technology. It's been around for decades. I wasn't even quite sure. I live in greater Boston. I wasn't really sure even what a heat pump was. So it's a replacement for a furnace. And it is an appliance that both heats and cools. It uses electricity. They're much more efficient than gas furnaces. They're not going to work for me in suburban Boston. They will work in milder climates. Last year, though, for the first time, sales of heat pumps in this country, in the US, outpaced gas furnaces. And in Europe, last year, heat pump sales grew by 40% year over year. And that was driven by the energy crisis coming because of the war in Russia, Russia-Ukraine war. So a lot of people were worried about energy costs and went to purchase heat pumps. So there will be steps forward to increase production, and very importantly, to make sure that the electrical grids are ready to, as more and more people switch to heat pumps or new purchases, people sort of sunset their existing furnaces, that the electrical grid can handle that kind of energy demand and that transition. So last item on my list are Twitter killers. So this is, I know, right? We're all hoping for them. So Twitter killers, this is our name for all the new social media options that have popped up as Twitter, or X, has lost its users, its advertisers. So in case you have been living in a cave, Elon Musk purchased Twitter. He renamed it X, fired most of its employees, more or less did away with verification and moderation systems. And that led to quite a lot of people to become disenchanted with it. There has been interest in new platforms, especially ones not owned by a single person. Options like that use decentralized protocols like Mastodon and Blue Sky. Those have gained popularity because of the advantage of them not being owned, as sort of the the revolutionary element to those. They allow for communication across independently hosted servers or platforms, and they enable more individual control over your connections and moderation and things like that. It is interesting, though, that thus far, none of those decentralized options has really exploded. That rather, thus far, it's been Threads, which is, of course, a Meta company, of course, owned by Mark Zuckerberg, that has been the most popular. Threads has very quickly got its monthly users to about 100 million per month, ish. Our editor-in-chief said that ultimately the real Twitter killer is Elon Musk. So that's it. That is the list of 10. I'm not done. There's more. There's more. We are soliciting input from you and from our audience of readers for the selection of our 11th technology. So what you do, if you're so inclined, is you scan this QR code and you vote. And here are the options. The first one is robo-taxis. So those are autonomous cars that come when you call them. Thermal batteries is number 2. These are systems that store clean energy as heat. Number 3 is lab-grown meat. And I talked about meatless burgers back with Bill Gates. This would be chicken made from cultivated cells, which is available in restaurants. Is this going to be the next great breakthrough? And then lastly, SpaceX Starship. Again, reusable rockets that lower the cost of launches and are increasingly widely used. So scan this QR code. Vote. We'd love to know what you think. We're going to stop taking votes on April 14th, and then we are going to write up a nice article about whichever one wins, and tell the story of why it's so important in our daily newsletter, which goes out to your email box. It's called The Download, and that will be on April 15th. So I'm not done. I'm going to stay for a couple more minutes. We often get asked, what didn't make the list and why? What did you not put on the list? What was borderline? And I think this is actually pretty interesting because it reveals a lot, not only about what's coming around the corner, but also kind of what explains what is on the list. And so I thought I would share. So there's a couple of, I'm going to go through, I think, 4 or 5. So there's new drugs for Alzheimer's disease. I don't know how many of you all have seen this. This has been in the popular press. But these drugs are meant to slow cognitive decline from the buildup of plaque. FDA approval has come through for one drug, and there's another one coming. The reason we didn't put it on the list is that there are severe side effects. We're talking brain bleeding and swelling, and it also appears to be very difficult to administer these drugs. So we are excited about the progress that's being made, but we don't think we're ready to put it on our list. Another one is sustainable aviation fluid. Sustainable aviation fuel. This is using cooking oil, animal fats, and other agricultural waste, and using that to power airplanes. There have been successful test flights. It's really very cool, but they're not quite there yet in the production. But keep an eye on that, because there's every reason to think that they will continue to make advancements. So another one is solar geoengineering, and this is like wild. So solar geoengineering is releasing particles into the stratosphere that reflect the sun's energy and that therefore cool the planet. It's like think of it like a big mirror, with the sun's beams being reflected back instead of coming onto the planet. It's very controversial, but there are a few researchers and companies that have been exploring this and doing pilot tests. There was some small-scale tests in Mexico. We did a great big expose on these tests, and then Mexico banned the tests. We weren't necessarily advocating the banning of the tests. We were reporting about what was taking place. It's really not clear where all this is going, but so it's for that reason we didn't put it on the list. But it is another thing to keep a watch on. Another one is male-male reproduction. So there has been success in creating healthy mouse pups. Who knew that a baby mouse is called a pup? Healthy mouse pups were created about a year ago, taking cells from 2 male mice. Some of those cells were transformed into eggs, and the eggs became pups. This advance may allow same-sex reproduction to other animals too, including perhaps humans. There's a long way to go before that's something that we would call a breakthrough. Again, something to keep a watch on. And then the last thing that I wanted to, that was one of the sort of near misses, was over-the-counter Narcan. So Narcan, as you probably are all aware, is a drug that reverses opioid overdose. It's now being sold nationwide by retailers like Walgreens, CVS, and Walmart. It's only like $40 for 2 doses. And so it is making this drug very, very widely available without a prescription, not expensive, will undoubtedly save lives. And we're talking about 80,000 Americans every year that die from opioid overdose. But we didn't put this on the list either, and that was because really the advance was in the distribution method, not the scientific or technological breakthrough. So that explains why we put on the list what we did. I hope you found it interesting. Our team loves working on this. It is like the favorite thing. I could probably give a version of this talk probably every week for the whole year. I hope it inspires you. I hope it challenges you. And ultimately, this is why we do what we do. We are just painfully earnest optimists. We want to bring innovations to you, the people who are creating the future. We want to nurture a new idea that could be a breakthrough, that will impact all of us. I can't wait to see what ideas you all come up with. I hope to read about them in MIT Tech Review, and I thank you for your attention.